What's going on, everybody? Steve V here with another video. I hope everybody's doing well out there. So in today's video, we're going to talk about the ones that got away. We're going to talk about my 10 favorite arcade 1-up cabinets that unfortunately I no longer own, either due to space, due to an upgrade, or due to the fact that there was a certain title that came out that I had more of a connection to that needed the spot of the previous cabinet. Now the way I'm going to do this is countdown style, so I'll start at number 10 and work my way up to number 1 so you guys can find out what that number 1 cabinet is that to this day I still regret selling. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let's get this countdown started. So before I start this countdown, I just want to give a quick honorable mention to 3 cabinets that really started this hobby for me that I no longer own. That's the Gen 2 Mortal Kombat 2 cabinet. That was my first cabinet that I purchased and really got me interested in collecting arcade 1-ups. The Gen 1 Pac-Man cabinet. This was probably one of my most played cabinets. I love Pac-Man, so it was so cool having a Pac-Man cabinet in my collection. And the Street Fighter 2 cabinet, which was the first arcade 1-up cabinet I ever saw. They had a demo unit at my local Walmart, and that's what really got me interested in looking into this company. And now in 2023 I have 14 arcade 1-up cabinets. So it all started with seeing that Street Fighter 2 cabinet. So I just wanted to give a quick mention to those 3. Let's start the countdown. Now coming in at number 10 is the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cabinet. When Arcade 1-up announced that they were coming out with this cabinet, it blew my mind. The fact that they were able to get this license just was amazing, and it was something that got me really excited. So when this cabinet came out, I pre-ordered it, and it was probably the most nostalgic cabinet that I had part of my collection. From the 2 games that were on the cabinet, the artwork, the fact that they actually made it a 4-player. It was their first 4-player cabinet, and I was glad they did that because it made it more authentic to the way the original cabinet looked. Now this cabinet brought me hours and hours of fun, and it was a cabinet that really spoke to a lot of people. A lot of my friends would come down and go nuts over that cabinet. A lot of my family members had a great time playing that cabinet. Me and my wife played that cabinet as well, and she enjoyed it. So I was really happy to have it part of my collection. But unfortunately, I went through a weird phase where for some reason I thought I just wanted 80s titles. So I ended up selling a few of my cabinets, and unfortunately TMNT was part of that group that I sold. About 2 weeks later, I came to a realization that I made a mistake, and I ended up going to Buy Stuff Store, who at that time was selling some arcade 1-up cabinets, and I ended up rebuying a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cabinet. Now I was happy to have it back in my collection, but unfortunately that one did have a couple imperfections just because it was a cabinet that they were actually using on the floor. It was kind of a demo model. So when Arcade 1-up announced that they were coming out with another TMNT cabinet, but it had Wi-Fi, had the coin doors, a new artwork, even though I did have a connection to the Turtles in Time artwork, I still do prefer the original artwork from the original Turtles cab. But I got the TMNT Turtles in Time cabinet now, and that will have to do. But I definitely miss that original cabinet. And if I could go back in time, I probably would have never sold my original one. So coming in at number 9 is the Final Fight cabinet. Now this was a cabinet that I ended up buying by accident. I was at work one day scrolling through Amazon and I saw that the Final Fight cabinet was on sale. A very small sale, but a sale that was enough that I wanted to put it in my cart, and also a riser as well because unfortunately it didn't come with a riser, and I wanted to see what the total was to at least see if it was worth buying. When I ended up putting it in my cart, I ended up accidentally hitting complete order, and next thing you know, Final Fight was on its way. Now, could I have canceled the order? Of course I could have. But I didn't cancel it because I was intrigued enough by the games that I was like, let me get this in the Man Cave arcade, try it out, and if it's worth it, I'll keep it. If not, I'll sell it. Man, was it worth it. Those 4 games were fantastic. I played Final Fight a few times all the way through. Ghosts and Goblins was hard as hell, but I enjoyed my time with that game, even though I couldn't get past, I think, the 2nd level. 1944, awesome game. A game that so many people enjoyed when they came to my Man Cave arcade. And Strider ended up being a great game that rounded off that cabinet. Now, the only reason I ended up selling that cabinet was because I knew the Capcom Legacy was coming out, and I knew those 4 games were part of the 12 games that were on that cabinet. So there was no need for me to keep the Final Fight when I was going to have a cabinet that was also going to have those 4 games. So it was time to kind of consolidate, but I do miss that cabinet because on the Capcom Legacy cabinet, those are the 4 games that I play the most. So it just goes to show how great that Final Fight cabinet was, and it definitely is missed in my collection. So coming in at number 8 is the 40th Anniversary Pac-Man cabinet. Now this cabinet really gave me my money's worth. Me being such a big Pac-Man fan, this was the first 3/4 scale Pac-Man cabinet that had 6 different variants of the Pac-Man game. It also had Galaga, and Galaga is in my top 5 favorite arcade games of all time. So this cabinet got played like crazy. To this day, even though I don't own this cabinet anymore, it's still probably my most played arcade cabinet that I had in the Man Cave arcade. Now, the only reason I sold it is because I got the Bandai Namco Legacy cabinet, and that obviously has 12 games, and it had the 7 games that were on that cabinet within the 12. So it just made sense for me to do that upgrade. Now, another thing that I really liked about that cabinet was that wood grain look. Obviously, I prefer the yellow because that's the traditional Pac-Man cabinet that we all know and love. But that wood grain look really spoke to me because the first Pac-Man cabinet I ever saw as a kid was a cabaret cabinet. So that cabinet was really taking some inspiration from that cabaret style, even though it didn't have a cabaret form factor like we've seen them do recently with the Pac-Man Plus cabinet. It did try to give a little bit of a nod to the cabaret style, and I really like that because it did really play to my nostalgia. So all in all, an amazing cabinet, and I really had a great time with it. So coming in at number 7 is the Marvel Superheroes cabinet. Now this was Arcade 1-Up's first Marvel cabinet that they did, and they made 2 different versions of this cabinet. They had a basic version that had blue T molding, no light up marquee, and the basic buttons and sticks. And then they had a limited version that had yellow T molding, a light up marquee, and better sticks and buttons, but both cabinets had the same 3 games. Now, funny story, I ended up talking to a customer service representative on the Bricks website, and at the time they were selling both cabinets, but of course the limited version was a little more pricey. When I talked to this guy, he was giving me a deal to basically get the limited version for the price of the regular version. Now, of course, I jumped on that, I got really excited, and then it was just a matter of the countdown to the call to go pick this cabinet up. Well, of course, I go to pick the cabinet up, and there it is in front of me, but it's not the limited version, it's the basic version. So I had to explain to this guy the situation of how this guy gave me a deal, and that's why the price is for the basic version, but I actually ordered the limited one. And he just didn't cave. He's like, this is what it is. If you want it, take it. If not, we give you a refund. And I was like, whatever. So I took the basic version. Now again, same 3 games, but just a funny story about how I thought I was getting the limited one. But even though I got the basic one, it was still a fantastic cabinet. Now I really enjoyed all 3 games. Marvel Superheroes and X-Men Children of the Atom. I didn't have a lot of experience with those 2 games. So me having that cabinet was really the first time I got to really play those games and experience them fully. But The Punisher was a game that I did know, and I really enjoyed that game. Now, unfortunately, I guess Arcade 1-Up is not going to be going forward with that title on any other cabinet. So it's one of those things where I'm kind of like, I wish I still had that Marvel Superheroes cabinet because I really enjoyed that game, and I know it's not going to show up again. But either way, my time with that cabinet was really fun, and that's why I had to put it at number 7. So coming in at number 6, Miss Pac-Man. Now this was a cabinet that I was super pumped to get into my Man Cave arcade when Arcade 1-Up finally announced that they were doing it. I didn't think they were going to be able to get that license, but somehow they managed to do it, and I'm so glad they did. Now with Miss Pac-Man, not only is it one of my favorite games, it's actually my favorite artwork when it comes to any arcade machine. I just think it's beautiful, it's so iconic. It's literally an image from that time period, you know, the colors that they used, and it's just very much the 80s. So with Miss Pac-Man, it was one of those things where I knew I wanted to have the cabinet, but I had to figure out what SKU I wanted because there was multiple SKUs of this cabinet. Now, the one that was most common in Canada was the one with the light up J panel that ended up being available in the States on the Home Shopping Network. I knew I didn't want that one just because that light up J panel, when it was lit up, the blacks turned into a gray, it looked washed out. And with Miss Pac-Man being so beautiful, I just thought it took away from the art by having that light up J panel. So I just didn't want that one. I knew that for sure. So I looked into some of the other SKUs, and the one SKU that really appealed to me was the one with Miss Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Galaxian, and Super Pac-Man, because out of those 4 games, 3 of those games I didn't have yet. Miss Pac-Man, Galaxian, and Dig Dug, and I was going to get it with that SKU. And then I was also going to have a Miss Pac-Man cabinet in my basement. So I ended up getting that off of Wayfair, which cost me an arm and a leg, but hey, you do what you got to do. Then I ended up buying a sticker for the kick plate to really complete the look of the cabinet, give it a coin door, give it that nice blue with the pink and yellow lining, and it just looked beautiful. I was so happy with that cabinet. Now, I ended up selling that cabinet because later on I ended up getting the Class of 81. Obviously, it came with 12 games, the online leaderboards, so it just made no sense for me to keep both. So I ended up selling it to a guy that ended up putting it in his cottage. So I know it ended up going to a spot where it was going to get some use, and it was definitely a shame losing that cabinet, but with the deluxe Miss Pac-Man coming out, maybe I might have Miss Pac-Man coming back in the mix. We're going to see. Because I do love that artwork, love that game, and you just can't go wrong with having a Miss Pac-Man cabinet in your collection. Coming in at number 5 as one of my favorite cabs that unfortunately I no longer own is Marvel vs. Capcom. Now, this was a cabinet that brought 3 different things to my man cave arcade. Number 1, brought the ability to play Marvel vs. Capcom. And the reason I mention that is because I had that ability very early on in my collecting. I had an Asteroids cabinet that I modified with a Pandora's box, and that was a game that I used to play quite often. So when I sold that cabinet, I lost that ability. So to have Arcade 1-Up actually come out with a Marvel vs. Capcom cabinet, it brought that game back into my collection, and I was really happy about that. The second thing was the fact that I brought back some of the games that I lost in the Marvel Superheroes cabinet when I sold that. So again, it was a cabinet that was just bringing back a lot of things that I really enjoyed that unfortunately I had to lose for one reason or another. So those 2 things were pretty cool. But the third reason was the main reason I really enjoyed that cabinet, and that was the online experience. Now, even though I got my butt kicked almost every single time that I played people online, there was no denying that that online ability really added to the replayability of that cabinet. And I also enjoyed the spectate mode of watching other people fight. It also was a cabinet that really got me involved with the Arcade 1-Up community. It was to the point where I even started a little group chat with some Canadian guys, so that way we can kind of play in matches. But then at the end of the day, it just ended up being a chat where a bunch of us fans just kind of talk about Arcade 1-Up stuff in general. But it was all started because of Marvel vs. Capcom. That was the main reason why I started that group. So that cabinet really brought a lot of great things into the Man Cave Arcade and just my life in general. But unfortunately, I had to sell it because I wanted to get the X-Men cabinet, and with that being a 4-player cabinet, it was going to take more room, so I needed to figure something out, and unfortunately, that was the cabinet that had to go, just because X-Men was a title that I wanted more, and that was a sacrifice that unfortunately I had to make. But it was a great cabinet, and I did enjoy my time with it. So coming in at number 4 is Outrun. Now, Outrun was Arcade 1-Up's first driving cab that they did. And at the end of the day, Outrun was a game that I really enjoyed playing on the Sega Genesis, so I felt comfortable enough to actually buy the cabinet. Now, here in Canada, unfortunately, we didn't get the stand-up version. We only got the sit-down version with that stool. I was not a fan of that stool. And that was actually part of the reason why I ended up selling the cabinet. But the actual cab with the games that it had itself was actually pretty good. I really enjoyed it. I ended up finding out that I played Outrunners, which was one of the games added, back in the day. It was one of those things where when I turned on the cabinet and started playing through the games, when I got to Outrunners, it kind of refreshed my memory, and I was like, oh my god, I played this game, I'm pretty sure at a movie theater. So it was a really cool experience just enjoying that cabinet and what that cabinet had to offer. Another cool thing was they ended up adding a fifth game to that cabinet as kind of like a treat, I guess. And I thought that was really nice of Arcade One Up to do that. It just added more value to that cabinet. Now I ended up selling that cabinet because I ended up getting Ridge Racer, and I don't regret doing that. But at the end of the day, if I had the room, it probably would have been nice to keep Outrun as well, because I think my son would have enjoyed that cabinet, especially with the stool, since obviously he's a toddler. I think he would have just enjoyed sitting there kind of playing with the wheel. But unfortunately, I don't have the room to have both, and Ridge Racer was more appealing to me. So I did what I had to do. I sold that run, got Ridge Racer, but it would have been nice being able to keep both. So coming in at number 3 is Burger Time. Oh, Burger Time. What a great game and a great cabinet that was. Now, unfortunately, that was a cabinet that I lost due to space. I had to make some room for The Simpsons and the Atari 12-in-1. So, unfortunately, something had to go. And at that point, I was really making my decision on how many games do I play on one specific cabinet. Now, on almost every cabinet that I have, I play multiple games. But when it came to Burger Time, unfortunately, I was just playing that game. I wasn't playing Karate Champ, I wasn't playing Caveman Ninja, and I wasn't playing Bad Dudes. So, it was kind of an executive decision, I guess. I had to part with something, and that was what had to go. But I love the game. I love the shape of that cabinet. The only negative I would say is the fact that they had to put 4 joysticks instead of the one in the center because of Karate Champ. But other than that, the cabinet was flawless. It was a great cabinet. But at the end of the day, I did want those other 2 cabinets a little bit more. And all is well because I ended up getting Burger Time back in the Man Cave Arcade in my 60-in-1 cocktail table. So it's kind of a win-win. I still have Burger Time down here. I lost the cabinet, but I got the other 2 cabinets that I wanted. And I play those cabinets a lot more than unfortunately I was playing any of those other games other than Burger Time. But again, I still have Burger Time in the cocktail table. So it's a win-win at the end of the day, but I still do miss the actual cabinet. So coming in at number 2 is the Atari Star Wars cabinet. Now this cabinet was fantastic. The main reason why I bought it though was not because of the 3 games on the cabinet. I actually had no experience with those games until I actually got the Arcade 1-Up cabinet. The 2 reasons that made me want to take a chance on that cabinet was number 1, it was a Star Wars cabinet that had to do with the 3 movies that I grew up on. And the second reason was because it offered a different kind of control than anything Arcade 1-Up had did to that point. I was really intrigued by that yoke and I wanted to give it a shot. So I bought the cabinet, and when I ended up getting it, I was not disappointed. It's probably the highest quality Arcade 1-Up cabinet to date. They really nailed this one to the point where when they came out with the re-release, they didn't really have to change much. So that tells you how great of a cabinet that was from day one. It had a great form factor. It was the first time we had really seen them make a form factor that looked similar to the way the original cabinet looked. So that was great. It had a great light up marquee, where at that time they were kind of playing around with light up marquees. That one really looked good for that time period. It was really high quality for what they could do at that point. The riser was a bit extended, which I thought was a great move by Arcade 1-Up because it made playing that yoke a lot more comfortable when you didn't have to bend over. The emulation of the 3 games was fantastic. Code Mystics was involved, and anytime Code Mystics does anything with Arcade 1-Up, you know it's going to be high quality. And then the yoke was something that was just so fun to experience, and I really feel like Arcade 1-Up did a good job with that yoke because I haven't heard anybody complain about their yoke breaking. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I'm just saying I haven't heard of it happening. So to me, no news is good news. And I know when I had the cabinet, I did feel like it was a good quality yoke. My friends and family loved that cabinet. They really enjoyed it while I had it down here. Unfortunately, I ended up parting with it because of the fact that I wanted to bring in a driving cabinet, and that was taking the spot that I needed for what ended up being Outrun at that time and later Ridge Racer. Do I regret it? Maybe I could have found a better cabinet to part with and maybe kept that one. But at the end of the day, I made that decision and I gave it to a guy in the community that seemed like a really nice guy that's actually part of a group chat that I'm still part of. So, it went to a good home, but it was definitely a great cabinet. And I'm glad that I took a chance on it. And that's why it's one of my favorites that unfortunately I no longer own. So coming in at number one as my favorite arcade one-up cabinet that unfortunately I no longer own is the Miss Pac-Man cocktail table. I loved that cocktail table, and unfortunately I had to sell it due to space, but to this day I still regret it, and I'll explain to you guys why. Now, to give you context of why this is my favorite cabinet, I actually have to go back to 1995. Now, I was at Pizza Hut with some friends. We were celebrating a birthday party, and as we were waiting for our pizza, there was a cocktail table in the corner that we were able to go and play. Now, this cocktail table was a 60-in-1, but the way it looked was it had wood grain on the bottom, and at the top, it was black, and it had some Miss Pac-Man logos on it. Now, that was something that really stuck out in my head, and when Arcade One Up announced this Miss Pac-Man cocktail table, it looked very similar to the way that cabinet looked. It had the wood grain on the side, though there was a Miss Pac-Man logo in the center, but at the end of the day, they still had the wood grain. At the top, it was black, and it had the Miss Pac-Man logos. It was as close to being like that Pizza Hut cabinet that I remembered as it could possibly be. So I knew right away that I had to have this thing. Unfortunately, it was not available in Canada, so the only way I could get it was through eBay, which cost me an arm and a leg. But I was willing to do it because I wanted that cabinet that bad. Unfortunately, that was the same time where I bought the stand-up Miss Pac-Man cabinet because I also wanted that one, and I ended up buying that from Wayfair to get the SKU that I wanted. So Miss Pac-Man ended up being a very expensive situation for me with both the 3/4 and the cocktail table. But either way, it really hit that nostalgia part of my memory and my heart. So I ended up buying those two cabinets, and the cocktail table was the one that I really wanted the most. Now, when I had that cabinet down here, I was in love with that thing. And I was really happy because Arcade One Up actually gave me more value by adding a couple extra games. Now, this cabinet, if I'm not mistaken, came with 8 games. But there was a firmware update that you could do where if you plugged it into your laptop, download the firmware, you could get an extra 2 games. So we ended up doing that, though we had a little scare because we thought we lost all the games because the screen wouldn't turn on there for a little while. But when we finally got it working, we ended up getting the 10 games. And it was 10 great Namco games. So I really felt like this cabinet was just everything I could ever want. And I was really satisfied with having it in the Man Cave arcade. Now the problem was I kept on collecting more Arcade One-Ups. I kept on collecting more junk. And I kept on collecting just things that were making the space super tight. So unfortunately, I had to part with that cabinet because I just didn't have the room to actually play it. Now, I was hoping to find a different space for it in the house, but unfortunately, there was nowhere I could put it, and the wife wouldn't really allow me to put it in our dining room where I originally wanted to put it, so I had to part with this cabinet. Now, the good news was I ended up actually getting a decent amount of money for this cabinet because I invested a lot of money, and when you sell Arcade One-Up cabinets, you never really get your money back, but this was probably the closest I've ever got to getting what I ended up investing in that cabinet. Now, the funny thing is, a couple of years later, I ended up getting another cocktail table, a 60-in-1 that is one of the taller cabinets. And now, hindsight being 2020, it just showed me that if I waited long enough, I probably could have kept that cabinet and would have had it where this cocktail table is right now. So that's why, deep down inside, I kind of regret selling it. I felt like if I just kind of waited it out, I probably could have found room for it. But then again, I guess it all worked out because now I have a 60-in-1, so I have the games that I really wanted in this space. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like the way that I was hoping the cocktail table that I had down here would look. And that was the way the Arcade One-Up cabinet looked. So, I won one way, but lost another way. But at the end of the day, I know this guy that bought it was very happy to have it. He had a man cave, so he was looking forward to putting that in his man cave. And I'm just glad that I had it for the time that I did because it did really bring me a lot of joy. And it is something that I miss dearly. But at the end of the day, I do have a cocktail table down here now. But at least now with the cocktail table that I have down here, I can kind of relive the fun that I had with that 60-in-1 cocktail table at Pizza Hut. So thanks so much for watching the video, you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this countdown of my 10 favorite arcade one-up cabinets that unfortunately I no longer own. I missed them all. They were all great cabinets, but unfortunately, you got to do what you got to do sometimes. And now I have 14 amazing cabinets down here that really fill the need of what I was looking to do in this man cave arcade as far as different titles, different controls, different playing experiences. I'm very lucky to have what I have. But I do miss quite a few of those cabinets, specifically that cocktail table. I really do miss that. But at the end of the day, they all went to good homes, and that's all that matters. So thanks again for checking out the video. I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a fantastic day.